I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision to prevent unsolicited calls and for connected purposes. Mr Speaker, lest anyone be in any doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg your pardon, lest anyone be in any doubt as to the seriousness and importance of this subject, I should inform the House that well over 100 members kindly offered to co-sponsor such a bill. This is the first time that I've had the privilege of attempting to bring a bill to the House, and I'm glad to be able to get this level of support from only a single email. Receiving unsolicited telephone calls has become an infuriating but inevitable part of our daily lives. They are intrusive, seldom of any use, and in many cases made with the sole intention of ripping people off. The situation has become normalised, and we should not be content with this. It is estimated that some 70 million nuisance calls are made every year. This is a growing problem. A Which survey estimated that 39% of calls in September 2016 were a nuisance. That same survey showed that the volume of nuisance calls for some was astonishing, with 10% of people receiving over 60 nuisance calls a month. That's 2 calls per day on average. Later data shows that Scotland is the worst area in the United Kingdom for rogue calls. The most recent figures from Which show that 71% of Scots believe that receiving cold calls has actually discouraged them from even picking up their home phone when it rings. And 41% say that they feel intimidated by cold calls. I've also seen new BT figures that claim that every household in the UK receives 4 nuisance calls a day. Across 23 million households in the UK, this would indicate the ridiculous figure of 5 billion nuisance calls a year. Needless to say that these numbers show the extent of a problem that is, at least, very large. This is intrusive. As people are sitting down with their family, enjoying a bit of downtime in front of the television, they get interrupted by a phone call which turns out to be an unwanted waste of time, inconvenient and annoying. And in the residential setting, this kind of disruption is never welcome. In businesses, unsolicited calls play havoc with the rhythm of the daily business routine and the productivity of offices. I heard of one business when one nuisance call was received by one phone, it could almost be guaranteed that every phone in the office would receive the same call throughout the day. This is distracting for employees, taking up precious time for no productive purpose and blocks the line, preventing customers and suppliers from being able to get through on the phone. I've also heard stories of helplines being clogged up with this kind of call, preventing people who genuinely need help getting through. It is the equivalent, Madam Deputy Speaker, of setting up a trader's stall outside a hospital A&E entrance which blocks ambulances from getting in. We wouldn't allow it in the physical world, so why should we tolerate it in telephony? For many who are more vulnerable, the people at the end of the phone gather data and try to foist products and services that usually are neither wanted nor needed. This leads to people getting ripped off by often unethical operators. There are laws against this already in place, but the line is blurry. While people who phone purporting to be from a company to gain access to your computer are breaking the law, the ones who phone to ask questions to build a profile of how vulnerable a person is may not be. This is certainly an issue that affects millions of people across the country, and one which I believe demands action from us as legislators, because we have a duty to ensure our legislation is effective and gives the authorities the power they need to effect solutions to what is a huge problem. I am not suggesting for one moment that the government has been complacent on this issue. Since the publication of the nuisance phone call strategy in 2014, there has been a great deal of government action on this issue, and I know how much my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, has undertaken in regard to this issue, both in his current role and in his previous role as Minister of State. The single most significant element was placing responsibility for all nuisance calls with the Information Commissioner's Office, creating a single port of call for the regulation of this issue. But more needs to be done, and making directors liable for the actions of their companies when they undertake nuisance calls is an essential part of the next step in this House that we should take to tackle this problem. And I hope to outline this as an element of what this bill will do. I should also recognise that much good work is being undertaken in the financial services legislation, which will outlaw the practice of soliciting insurance claims over the phone, making annoying traffic accident and PPI calls a thing of the past. The Scottish Government, which, as members will know, I am often a critic, has done much good work in this area. Ensuring people are aware of scams, especially the most vulnerable in our society, is something that the Scottish Government have spent money on, and they have taken proactive steps to ensure that these warning messages get to the people who need to hear them. The Scottish Government also estimates that the UK-wide economic harm from scam calls comes to £3 billion. This was a report published only last month, looking at the effectiveness of actions to reduce harm from nuisance calls. The work the Scottish Government have done has shown some results, and it's worth looking at across the UK. The private sector has also been hard at work on this issue. The Telephone Protection Service, TPS, is a great way of limiting your exposure to nuisance calls. BT have been working very hard to limit this. In my constituency of Stirling, Truecall worked with our local trading standards unit to install call blockers in vulnerable households, and they have blocked over 21,000 scam and nuisance calls. Now I'd like to outline, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I envisage the bill will do. It's effectively divided into three parts. The first of these, as I have said, is to make the penalties more robust, to widen the way that they can be applied. It is an aspect of the problem that companies who make nuisance calls are often pop-up companies that are designed to make money and then go bankrupt and, if caught, avoid a fine. This is an abuse of what the company law is there to do. This bill would ensure that directors of such companies are personally liable for fines for nuisance calls. This reflects the private member's bill brought in by the former member for Edinburgh West, and especially the work of the member for North Ayrshire. And I'd like to pay tribute to the work that she has done on this issue. Making directors personally liable will make people think twice before authorising such activities. Second aspect of this bill will tighten up on the definition of a nuisance call. We may all think we know what a nuisance call is. It's when someone calls us up and tries to sell us something that we don't really want. But in fact, is that the definition of a nuisance call that we should adhere to? Sometimes we are looking for calls from businesses that we aren't expecting, which are good. And is it simply right to say a nuisance call is a call we don't want? That would effectively end the opinion poll business, and it would also end all telephone canvassing. And I'm not sure whether that would make this more desirable or less desirable to members. It is clear that the definition in the current law is not effective, and this bill would seek to empower government and the regulator to have a more robust definition of nuisance calls. Lastly, I would like to place a general responsibility on unsolicited callers to ensure that the numbers they are dialling are not registered with the telephone preference system. This would mean that when phone numbers are bought and sold, as they are with valuable data, as with any valuable data commodities, it would be a responsibility of both the purchaser and the seller to establish whether a number is a TPS number, and both parties would be able to be fined if they had not performed due diligence on the nature of the numbers that have been traded. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an important issue which has rightly gained a lot of attention from across the House. It has also elicited a lot of conversation with the private sector, and I would like to thank Brendan Dick and his team at BT Scotland for providing me with an excellent briefing, as well as Which and citizens' advice for the work they have already done in this area. If we can make the situation better for people, we will remove a nuisance and make everyone's lives a bit easier, and at the same time improve business productivity. It is seldom that one finds such widespread agreement on any issue across the House, and therefore I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Kate Hoey, Hugh Gaffney, Rachel Reeves, Mr Alistair Carmichael, Ben Lake, Nigel Dodds, Larry Herman, Dame Cheryl Gillan, Fiona Bruce and Patricia Gibson, and myself. Yeah.
Stephen Kerr.
Unsolicited Calls Prevention Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 6th of July.
Friday the 6th of July. Thank you. Very good bill.